and Sir Francis Bacon, the secret societies would have to control the new world, and in time, subdue the old. But how to bring about this utopian empire? In his writings, Sir Francis Bacon called for a universal reformation of the whole wide world. To bring about this reform, some believe the secret societies launched a world revolution.
People do not understand that our revolution was the first in a series of revolutions that began in 1776 and extended right up until the Cuban Revolution in 1959 when Fidel Castro came to power. And this is a series of revolutions to transform the world.
While most Americans did not fight the War of Independence for the cause of global revolution, it is undeniable that secret societies played an important role and that many of America's founders were Freemasons.
Many of them were Masons, but they were into Masonry because, of course, this was the only way that they could protect themselves. This was the only way they could keep from being found out. So they were plotting a revolution. They had to have a means of maintaining their secrecy.
I think Masonry was, in fact, used as a built-in network, a secret network in which to foment the American Revolution. They didn't have to put a network together. It was already there. All they had to do was sort of ride on the back of Freemasonry to make the American Revolution work.
And work it did with the help of Masonic ingenuity, beginning with the kickoff event, the Boston Tea Party.
And what was the Boston Tea Party? Who was behind that? Who were the raiders of the English tea ship? Admittedly, at this point, it was the Masonic Lodge in Boston. They were all Masons. It was the Masons wanting to implement this revolution.
The leader of the men who dressed up like Indians and threw the tea into Boston Harbor was the legendary Paul Revere, whose famous ride would alert Americans that the British were coming. Pictured here with a teapot commemorating his rebellion, Paul Revere was a prominent member of the Masonic Order. George Washington, known as the father of our country, along with many of his generals, were also Masons. Yet Washington's involvement with Masonry is hotly debated.
Our information is that he did not do anything with the Masonic Lodge for the last 30 years of his life.
The debate centers around a letter written by George Washington to the Reverend G.W. Schneider on September 25, 1798, just 15 months before Washington's death. In the letter, Washington says specifically, "I must correct an error you have run into of my presiding over the English lodges in this country. The fact is, I preside over none, nor have I been in one more than once or twice within the last 30 years.
And in Washington's case, I defend him by saying the Masons are very secretive. When they approach a man to be a member of their organization, they will not and cannot tell him what it's all about. But what they can do is to say, well, you see, there were all these famous people. They were Freemasons, and they can name off the kings. And today, of course, they can name off Washington. And so the candidate will then argue to himself, well, who am I? I'm just a little guy, you know, or I might be a senator, but nevertheless, who am I compared with these? If it was good enough for them, surely it's good enough for me. If it's secret, it's going to be a good thing. So they get in, and they're not told the whole story. They're not told in the first, second, or even third degree. They're not told the whole story, but little by little, as they acquire more knowledge and as they are deemed to be faithful to the cause, they are told more. And that's just how they get the people in.
It is only fair to mention that many Masons continue to insist that Washington was very active in the craft. Yet there is no debate about the Masonic membership of Benjamin Franklin, who is deeply involved not only with Masonry, but a whole variety of secret societies in America, in England, and in France. societies that had everything to do with his success during the American Revolutionary War.
Benjamin Franklin is a very paradoxical, complex fellow, as might be expected for someone who was such a great genius. But at times he seems like he's a Christian. At times he seems like he's a scoundrel. At times it seems like he's a Luciferian, and at times it seems like he's a Rosicrucian.
He was a strange character, Benjamin Franklin, a sort of a shuttle diplomat between Philadelphia and Paris and London, England.
He was, of course, an ambassador in Europe, and when he was over in Europe, he became a member of a group called the Hellfire Club, which was a kind of pseudo-satanic organization in 1700s. It was founded by an English nobleman named Francis Dashwood, and it basically existed as a place where men could gather and have orgies and worship the devil and basically get loaded and do whatever they wanted, under the guise of it being a satanic society.
The Hellfire Club was a part of the so-called gentlemen's clubs of 17th and 18th century England. While the debauched behavior of these groups was initially tolerated, once they began to dabble in satanic rituals, they were forced to go underground, literally.
Hellfire Club, as a matter of fact, I used to live quite near that place. It's on the west side of London, at a place called West Wickham. It's a hill. It's a chalk hill, now of course covered in grass, and on the top of that chalk hill is a church. On the top of the church there's a golden ball. There's a cross on top of that. Now that's a Christian church, but inside the hill is a cave. Often those chalk hills, they do have caves inside them. It's the way they're formed. And in the cave there, they would gather together. Now, I don't say that it was the church, the occupants of the church that gathered there, but whether they knew it or not, the Hellfire Club would hold their meetings once a month underneath the church. And Benjamin Franklin would go and visit that at the times when he came to visit England, yeah.
He was very much apparently into some of the ideas of the esoteric movement of his day.
A book on witchcraft, magic, and the supernatural claims that Benjamin Franklin often came to Sir Francis Dashwood for information on the occult. Dashwood himself was said to be a Rosicrucian and leading member of the secret orders. In this portrait, we see a young Francis Dashwood with his hand posed in a fist-like position. In Masonry, this hand signal is known as the lion's paw and is used in Masonic ritual. Among Satanists, however, this same gesture is said to be called the devil's claw. While it cannot be said how deeply involved Franklin was with the occult, the Hellfire focus on drinking and debauching women would certainly have agreed with his character.
He was very famous for being a ladies' man. He was very much a playboy, which of course would be contrary to being a devout Christian.
The Hellfire Club had great disdain for Christianity. In fact, they did not call themselves Hellfire, but rather the monks of Medmenham Abbey. Such parody was the influence of a French priest named Francois Rabelais, condemned as a heretic for writing a series of perverse comedies called Gargantua and Pantagruel. In them, Rabelais mocked religion, glorified immorality, and defended man's right to pursue without restraint the desires of his own will. Adopting his philosophy, the Hellfire motto was, "Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law." Could this have been what attracted Franklin to the group? An opportunity to escape the puritanical tendencies of America, while in England to pursue lusty desires that would have been openly condemned by his fellow countrymen, at least at that time. But more than a century later, the Hellfire motto would be adopted by British occultist Aleister Crowley, who was often called the wickedest man in the world. Like Francis Dashwood and the Hellfire members, Crowley took part in satanic rituals, most famously at his Abbey Thelema in Sicily. a name taken from Francois Rabelais' anti-Christian parodies.